We continue now at the top of Daf Tzadi Gimel Amud Aleph and Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 93a. This daf is sponsored by David Grossman. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you would like to sponsor an Amud or a daf, see the description box below. And see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amud, there was a machlokas amoraim between Rav and Shmuel, whether we follow Rov, whether we follow majority when it comes to monetary cases. Rav says we do follow Rov, and Shmuel says we do not follow Rov. And the Gemara is in the middle of asking a question from a Brisa. The Brisa is discussing a case where a person buys a slave, and it turns out that the slave is a ganav, is a thief, or he's a kubustus, he's a gambler, or maybe a kidnapper. And so the Gemara now says, in that case of the Brisa, my time, and what is the reason in that case of the Brisa that we say that's considered to be a good sale? And the Rashbam explains, Reisha my time higio. Why do we say in that first case of the Brisa that it's a good sale when it turns out that the slave is a ganav or a kubustus? V'alo ein lach mum gadol mi ganav o kubustus. There's no greater blemish than the slave being a ganav or a kubustus. V'afilu hachi kana lokeach. And nevertheless, we say that the buyer requires that the sale goes through. V'afagav de lo kibel olav mumin beferish. Even though the buyer never said that he's accepting upon himself a slave that has blemishes, so why is it that the sale goes through? And the Gemara says, Lav mishum, isn't it because the ruba hachi isnu, that's true by the majority of slaves? Most of them are going to be a ganav or a kubustus, and so therefore it shows that we do in fact follow Rov. This seems to be a support for Rav. And the Gemara says, Lo, no, kulu hachi isnu. It's not that the majority are ganav or kubustus. It's actually that all of them are ganav or kubustus. That's why over here the sale goes through, and therefore this brisa is not actually going to be a proof for Rav. And the Rashbam explains, Lav mishum deruba avdi hachi isnu. Isn't the explanation of this first part of the brisa that the majority of slaves, this is what they are? They're ganavim, they're either thieves, or kubustusin, or they're going to be gamblers. V'ladas kain kanu halokech. And so therefore, we really say that it's as if the buyer had intention that he was buying a slave like this. Uchamisha kibel olav dami. It's like he did accept that this would be the case. So alma. So therefore, we see b'mamona azlin and basaruba that by money we're following majority. We're assuming that that's the intention of the buyer because that's true of the majority of the slaves. And therefore, v'kasha l'shmuel. Therefore, this would be difficult according to Shmuel to kaven de lo azil basaru, because according to Shmuel, if we don't follow majority, kapalga upalga dami. So then it's just like 50-50. We don't know what the status of the slave will be. And if that were the case, why would we say it's a good sale? If you're going to assume like Shmuel, so the buyer had no idea this blemish was there. And certainly we can say that in general a buyer wants to have a good slave. Like we say later on, a person gives money to get good produce. And the general rule is that a blemish is going to nullify any kind of sale. If it's something that was not known to the buyer. And the Rashbam continues, Umeshani, the Gemara answers, Lo, no, kulu hachi isnu. It's actually true by all slaves. They're all ganavim, they're all thieves. So it's as if the seller told the buyer explicitly that this is the case. Because the buyer knows that the slave is a ganav, and again, that's the explanation of the first part of the brisa. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following Mishnah in Baba Kama. Shor shenogach esapar, if an ox gores a cow, v'nimtza ubra betzid, and then we find that there's an offspring, there's a fetus at the side of the cow. Ve'eno yodu, and it's not known, imachalo nogcha yolda, if the birth happened before the goring. O imishanogcha yolda, or maybe the birth happened after the goring, meaning we don't know if this was just a regular miscarriage, or did this happen because of the goring, and therefore the owner of the ox should be responsible. And so the Mishnah says, Mishalim chatzi nezek lepara or reveal of vlad. What we do is we say you pay chatzi nezek, you pay half damages for the damages to the cow. That's standard in the case of goring. But in terms of the offspring, we don't really know if he owes chatzi nezek or not. So we split it. We say if you have a situation of doubt, we split the money, and therefore you only pay a quarter damages for the offspring. That's what the Mishnah says. And so the Gemara now says, V'yamai, now why should that be true if we follow majority like Rav? Leima halach acha rov paros, we should say that we follow the majority of cows. V'rov paros misabros v'yoldos, and most cows are going to give birth and it's not going to be a miscarriage. And therefore, if you follow that understanding, v'havadai machmas negicha yipila, so certainly it was because of the goring that there was a miscarriage over here. If we're following majority, we should say that the owner of the ox does have to pay for the damage. And the Gemara says, no, Hasam over there, Mishum de Mesaf Kulon, still, even if you had that majority, we still have a doubt, because the Ikal Amemer, because it's possible to say, Mikama'a, so that the goring happened from in front of the cow, Umibiasusa Hipila, and therefore really the cow was frightened, and that's why it was a miscarriage. It wasn't really due to the goring anyhow, even if it's indirectly due to the goring, but it wasn't directly due to the goring, and therefore the owner of the ox is not responsible. And on the other hand, Ikal Amemer, it's also possible to say, Me'achora, so that the ox gored from behind, Umingach Nogcha Vihipila, and it was because of the goring that there was a miscarriage, and that's really the suffix over here, have maman hamutal besuffic. So therefore, it's a situation of money that is in doubt. V'chol maman hamutal besuffic. Anytime we have doubt about money, chol can we divide, and so therefore this Mishnah will not serve as a proof in terms of rov. And the Gemara continues, Lema ketanoi, let us say the machlokus between Rav and Shmuel, whether we follow majority by monetary cases. Let's say that's actually a machlokus tanoim from the following brisa. The brisa says, Shor shahayaro, if you have an ox that was grazing, v'nimtza shor harug betzido, and there's another ox that's found that's killed by its side, aval pisha zem menugach v'zem muad ligach, even though the animal that was killed, it clearly was gored, and this animal that was grazing, we know that it's a muad, that it's accustomed to goring. Or zem menushach v'zem muad lishach, let's say we see that this animal was bitten, and we know that this animal, it generally bites. So ein omen, we don't say biyadua shazen nagcha. We don't say that it's clear, it is known that this animal is the one that gored. V'zen nashcho, this is the animal that bit. We don't follow that chazaka. Rather, we say you have to bring evidence. Otherwise, the owner of the animal does not have to pay. And the brisa continues. Rabbi Acha disagrees. Rabbi Acha says, Gomel ha'ocher bein hagamalim. If you have a camel rampaging among the other camels, v'nimtza gomel harug besido, and it turns out that there's a camel that's killed next to it. So it's clear, it's known that it was the rampaging camel that killed it, and so therefore we do follow essentially the chazaka in this case, so it seems to be a machlokas tanoim, as the Gemara now explains. Savrua deruba v'chazaka ki adadininu. Right now we think that majority or a chazaka, this case is really not talking about majority, it's talking about a chazaka on this particular animal, but that's really the same thing. And if you say that's the same thing, so leima Rav d'Yamar Rabbi Acha, Shmuel d'Yamar Tanakama, let us say that Rav follows Rabbi Acha follows chazaka, Rav follows rov, he follows majority, and Shmuel follows the Tanakama. The Tanakama says you don't follow the chazaka, Shmuel says you don't follow the majority. That seems to be the same. And the Gemara answers that chazaka and rov are not necessarily the same. Amar lach Rav can say to you, I know the Amri afilu Tanakama, I can follow everybody. I can follow even the Tanakama. Adkan lo kamar Tanakama, hasam ela de lo azlin and basar chazaka. All the Tanakama said in this brisa is that we don't follow chazaka. Aval basar ruba azlinan, but in terms of majority, we would follow majority. And similarly, the Gemara says, Shmuel Amar lach, Shmuel can say to you, I know the Amri afilu Rabbi Acha, I can go even according to Rabbi Acha. Adkan lo kamar Rabbi Acha hasam ela de lo azlin and basar chazaka. Rabbi Acha only said in the brisa that we do follow chazaka. Dehu gufe muchsa, because this animal itself has a chazaka. There's a presumption about this animal that it causes this kind of damage. Aval basar ruba, but in terms of following majority, lo azlinan, we would not follow majority, and so therefore this machlokas tanoim is not necessarily connected to the machlokas amoraim between Rav and Shmuel. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from our Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Hamocher peros lechaver, if somebody sells produce to his friend, v'zorin v'lo tzimechu, and he plants it and it doesn't grow, v'afilu zera pishtan, even if what was sold were flax seeds, which are normally not eaten, they normally are planted, so you'd think the buyer has a claim, eino chaye b'achriyusin, but the seller is not responsible in that case, because again, the seller can always say that I was selling it to you for the purpose of eating it, not for the purpose of planting it. And so the Gemara now says, Maya filu. What does it mean in the Mishnah when it says even zera pishtan? Doesn't it mean to say lava filu zera pishtan? Doesn't it mean to say even seeds of flax? The rubel is riyazavni. Most people who buy flax seeds, they're buying it to plant. Ve'afilu hachi, and nevertheless, lo azlin and basaruba. Apparently, we don't follow majority, meaning the buyer does not have a claim. He can't say that since we follow majority, I was obviously buying these to plant them and they didn't grow properly, and so therefore you're responsible. He cannot say that, and it seems that we do not follow rov. So our Mishnah seems to be a question against Rav. And the Gemara says Tanoihi. The Gemara says you're right. Our Mishnah is a question against Rav, but it's actually a machlokas Tanoim. Rav does have Tanoim who are on his side. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, Hamocher peres lechaver, if somebody sells produce to his friend, v'zoran v'lo tzimechu, and the buyer plants it and does not grow, so it depends what kinds of seeds. Zirune gina, if we're talking about seeds of a gina, garden seeds, meaning these are she'ein nechol, and these are seeds that are normally not eaten, chayev b'achrayusan, so then the person would be chayev, because you don't eat those kind of seeds. They're not edible at all. But zera pishtam, but if you're talking about flax seeds, which the majority are planted, but they are edible, so eino chayev b'achrayusan, so there the seller is not responsible. That follows in line with our Mishnah. And the Brisa continues, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video, on Daf Tzadi Gimel Amud Beis.